Hello, everybody. Scott Golden here with Pro Wrestling Logic, and I haven't been here in a little less than a month. I'm going to give a real short update, literally less than 30 seconds. I was in a nursing facility due to a health breakdown for 15 months. There was a medical botch while in that facility, which has permanently damaged my shoulder. During the last month, I have been having complications with that injury and therefore have not been around as much. Plus, my primary source of income, client retention and expansion, has taken a great deal more of my time than normal, and so this channel fell by the wayside. With it being a new month, I have endeavored to start being here more regularly, and hopefully my body will cooperate with that desire. But with this being new and this being kind of a relaunch for the channel, I want to start a new series, and that is the World Class Championship Wrestling WCCW television review series. I am still going to be covering weekly every mainstream show here in 2020, starting with tonight's Raw on August 3rd. But I'm going to try and do at least one, if not more, episodes of WCCW per day until we get through the about 400 that are on the WWE Network in review fashion. I have not seen these in their completion, so it's actually going to be fun for me to kind of check out the benefit of new wrestling for me. I always like newer old school, and old school to me is before, let's say, the year 1996 to 1998. Newer old school stuff that I haven't seen episodically, so this will be a fun journey for hopefully everyone involved. Please like, subscribe, comment below if there's a series you'd like to see, but let's get to the action as we speak. We start with the 2nd of January 1982, and this is the World Class Championship Wrestling, I believe, debut television program. At least I haven't found any evidence that there's an earlier program under the same name. I do know that the promotion goes back to the 60s, of course, run by Fritz von Erich, the patriarch of the von Erich family. And this runs through about 1989, 1990, before finally dying and being absorbed by the USWA in 89 to 90. So, like I said, there should be about 400 episodes, give or take, and we're going to go through those, hopefully, by the end of the year. My goal is to have the entire series up by the end of the year. Hopefully, I can accommodate that. Anyway, we open with Thomas Shaft versus Carlos Zapata. I had watched some of these episodes earlier, probably about maybe 3 or 4 months, but this is the first time I've watched them seriously for review-taking purposes. Really enjoyed Shaft in his, for me at least, debut match. Had not seen his work before. Don't know that he worked outside of Texas very much, but for those unfamiliar, the backstory were given by the announcers, who Jose Lothario, most notably a Southwestern star, but also most notably the original trainer of Shawn Michaels, Hall of Famer, is your analyst for the evening. And I understand it because they do play the majority of Texas as their territory, and there is a great Latin population. That being said, with his thick accent, at times I found Lothario difficult to understand. But this is not the first time that we've had announcers that are difficult to understand in prominent roles. Argentina Rocca goes all the way back to the mid-60s on WWF television for, at the time, Capital Sports Television, for Vince McMahon Sr., or, the elder McMahon. Rocca was difficult to understand. I've seen some clips of that as well. So certainly, if it's going to resonate with your audience to have a wrestling analyst in the booth, certainly worth doing. Relatively basic match here. We see Shaft, who the story told about him is that he has won tough man competitions, which during the late 70s, early 80s, tough man, bare knuckle competitions were the rage across the United States and probably Canada to a lesser extent. But anyway, they were acknowledged as such, and so him being acknowledged for being in these type of events was a pretty big deal at the time. In a later interview, which we will comment on in a moment, in his post-match interview, he says up to 48. The announcers were giving a little bit lower number. I think they were around 38 or 40, but he is a relatively basic wrestler, well built. Reminds me of another dual sport star, and that being George Wells, who was in the WWF for a short bit in the 85-86 range. In terms of just build and athletic ability, reminding me of Wells here. Zapata does make a comeback, and the announcer does something reasonably annoying, which is kind of funny to go back and listen to, and that is he calls a back body drop a backwards throw, which I don't know if that was just a Texas thing or whether that is actually what it was termed in the late 70s, early 80s. But he does it several times throughout the program, so the assumption is that it was something that was knowledgeable and pretty regular. In any event, we move through the match, and the match is relatively basic, although, again, we do see great athleticism from Shaft, including a leapfrog, using power with shoulder tackles. He eventually does win the contest and does so rather handily over Zapata. Very basic match, I guess, by today's standards, but certainly one can assume or would have reason to assume that Shaft would be, who is also referred to as Thomas Boogaloo Shaft, would be seen as a major mainstay in the area, or have the potential to be at least. Then we move to our second match. The runtime on this is about 44 minutes or so. Looking at these, they look to be, at least for 82 standards, pretty complete, running between 39 and 44 minutes, the majority of them. There are some that are clipped due to lost television footage, but they seem relatively complete from what I can tell. The Monk, which is an odd name for an enhancement talent, versus Big Daddy Bundy. Now, if the Bundy name sounds familiar to you, yes, this is, in fact, the earliest, or one of the earlier renditions of King Kong Bundy, who later went to the World Wrestling Federation for a couple of stints during the mid-'80s and once again in 1994-95 or so. But here, there is a few differences for Mr. Bundy, who, fun trivia fact, the television program Married with Children is tied to the Bundy name, and I believe they took it from the tie to King Kong Bundy. I believe I heard that somewhere several years ago, so fun fact there. Bundy does appear on the Married with Children program, I believe twice. I know it was once, and I believe he was on a second episode as well later in the series. But anyway, Bundy, two different notes here. Firstly, he has hair. Now, King Kong Bundy, who legitimately was over 400 pounds, I had the opportunity when I was working Independence in the late 90s, early 2000s to meet Bundy several times. Really engaging, funny guy, but certainly he was iconically known for the black singlet and the shaved head, but not here. A reasonable good bit of brown hair is across Mr. Bundy. And the second thing that I don't think I've seen before is that King Kong Bundy, or Big Daddy Bundy in this case, was in fact a babyface. And I don't know that I have seen this before. The backstory given by the announcers, by the way, is that Bundy wanted to wrestle, but he was working in the upper parts of Alaska and found his way to Texas. It was said that Jose Lothario was training him, at least partially at the time. As one could imagine, this is a showcase match for Bundy. Although even here, being that the name of the channel is Pro Wrestling Logic, there were some rather illogical things done in the match. one of which was seeing Bundy execute arm wringers and a leg drop across the arm, which you would usually see in opening match type stuff or early match cards, but kind of downplaying his power just a little bit, in my opinion. The second thing that I found really interesting is there's a spot mid-match where he locks in a bear hug and the combatant doesn't submit, but he later does dive forward while still having the man in the bear hug and squash him, which obviously it was done safely, but at the time, if we go back into 1982 mindset and knowing that it was targeted towards, let's say, teenagers, the image of a 400-plus pound guy falling on you, probably not very pleasant. And so that's worth going out of your way to see if you want to see King Kong Bundy before he was nationally known. So then we move on to the interview with Thomas Boogaloo Shaft. He talks about going all over the country with Tough Man contests. He mentions Kabuki, which seems to be a major theme throughout this particular program. Kabuki is managed by Gary Hart, and we will talk about him later as he is in the program, and I believe at the end of this program mentioned as a combatant in next week's affair against one of the Von Erichs. But anyway, he mentions wanting to fight Kabuki. He mentions working his way through 48 Tough Man competitions and having wins, I believe, in most, if not all of them. He says he's ready to fight, ready to go, and ready to challenge just about anybody in the way. He explains that anyone can enter Tough Man contests as long as they're cleared by a doctor. However, I can't imagine the type of individuals who would engage in a Tough Man contest really caring what a medical professional had to say, so I wonder if that was an embellishment for the camera or what that was. But anyway, he also is ready to fight just about anybody and really does look like he has a need for some polish, but certainly poise in front of a camera, and it'll be interesting to watch him develop over the weeks and months to come. Anyway, we move on to the Von Erichs, in this case, Kevin and Kerry, with a ringside interview hyping their match later with Arman Hussein, who later becomes a manager of note for World Class, and also Killer Tim Brooks, who recently passed away. Brooks, for those interested, was a mainstay in the 70s through the 80s in the Texas area, primarily, and is of note today because he is the trainer for current NXT champion Keith Lee. Lee acknowledging him on NXT some weeks ago, but Brooks really was kind of the old barrel-chested brawler type. Hussein, who at the time is a tag team champion with Brooks, is promoted as a Muslim, which at the time, if we look at 1982, I don't know that many television programs were promoting religions, and he integrated the Muslim prayers as part of his pre-match ritual, and that just struck me as an easy way to get heat in the middle of Texas in the early 80s, and I'm sure it was. Anyway, the promo between or with the Von Erichs is relatively nondescript. They talk about, wanting to be home in Texas, where the wrestling is best. Kevin, who talks about traveling to Atlanta to be on the Atlanta television program recently, so I assume that would be the Georgia territory of the time, and doesn't directly mention the TBS network, but mentions being on national television, which would have necessitated him to be on TBS at the time, and go up there for exposure. So it's kind of an interesting thing to see the World Class brand acknowledging the National Wrestling Alliance, of which they were a member, I believe, until 1985, 86, somewhere around there. But just interesting to see the acknowledgement of the NWA with a territory as large as the World Class brand. And, they hype the main event later in the program, a non-title match for the American Tag Team Champions of Hussein and Brooks. They also basically call the champions cowards for not putting the belts on the line. Kabuki with Gary Hart against Jesse Rolango Leon. Leon is a relatively nondescript enhancement talent, at least for what I saw. Now, I may be ill-informed again. I did not get to watch World Class on its first run through. I didn't become a fan until 1989, just as the brand was ending. So a lot of these talents I don't have full-on knowledge about, and I'll be learning about them as I go through these reviews. If you have knowledge of things that I should watch to make myself better rounded for the purposes of these reviews of stuff that's before these times, which obviously is harder to find because VCRs on a national level really didn't become available until 1977 or 78, and we're here in 82, so there'd only be a few years at best of footage to watch with many of these talents. But if there are matches and things I can watch to make myself more well-rounded, I'm certainly willing to do that. Anyway, back to the action. Kabuki, who spits the green mist, which most people associate with the Great Muta, but Kabuki actually had done it first, and I don't know if he was the first to ever do it, but certainly time-wise he is one of the first, if not the first, to do the mist deal. He is wearing some sort of head covering before getting started in the match, and uses a series of martial arts. The one thing that I find really interesting here, actually there's a couple, but martial arts maneuvers, just like strikes and chops, really acknowledged as a big deal here when used by Kabuki because he's tied to the Orient. Kabuki is under-challenged in this match, really meant to be a showcase for him as he is going to face one of the Von Erichs next week. Another thing of note is that he does walk the top rope and execute a chop near the end of the match. I would say that the match is minorly, let's say a quarter competitive, but certainly intended to be a showcase for Kabuki. Another thing that's really interesting is nerve holds and submission holds seem to be popular in the territory, as we obviously know that the Von Erichs are famous for the claw, but there is a nerve hold right along the rib cage that Kabuki goes back to several times in the match, which is seen as a martial arts maneuver. I obviously wouldn't stand up today with what we know of mixed martial arts, but for the time, probably innovative, and with martial arts movies being as popular as they were, reasonably acknowledgeable. There is a preponderance of Kabuki using the maneuver several times, prompting the lead announcer to remind people not to try these maneuvers at home, even in 1982, which I found amusing at the time. Leon does get one really cool offensive maneuver, and that is a top rope dropkick, which is really cool to look at, just because it's really well executed. Other than that, though, he does fall to the great Kabuki. And then your main event, I looked at the time, and there was about 14 minutes left in the program, and the thought of 14 minutes of Von Erichs versus Hussein and Brooks seemed really long. They did go almost about 10, but and then they wrapped up the program for the final 3.5 to 4 minutes. But the interesting thing is the Sportatorium crowd, the Dallas Sportatorium, which is a historic building, but almost is a predecessor in a lot of ways to the ECW arena in terms of just size and kind of being a hole in the wall, really did come alive for everything the Von Erichs did, even here in 1982. So it's really kind of a testimony to having homegrown talents that are just seen as heroes, and no one can deny that everything the Von Erichs did was, in fact, simple and easy and easy to follow. Anyway, so the Von Erichs are taking the majority of the match on the defensive. Interesting to me is that at this point, the only times I'd seen Kevin Von Erich, and I've seen a fair amount, although never really paid terribly a lot of attention. I was always a Kerry fan, and I hadn't seen much of David, but what I had seen of David, I liked David more than I liked Kevin. It's just how it came out for me. But anyway, Kevin does a lot of the firing up, a lot of the comebacks. What was interesting is this is the first time I'd actually seen Kevin Von Erich wrestle in boots. So it's just ironic to me that he's known for wrestling barefoot, and many people commented on it, but I did not know that he had worn boots on television. So that was kind of interesting just to see. Anyway, the match is very much a slow plotting affair with the heels getting the majority of the offense. That is until the Von Erichs finally do get a win, with Kevin taking a very graceful leaping sunset flip off the top rope to get the 3 count. The champions do continue to beat down on Kerry post-match. And once again, we close the show reminded that Kabuki will face, and I don't remember which Von Erich, but I think it was Kevin, but maybe I'm wrong, one of the Von Erichs next week on the January 9th episode. So anyway, that is the close for today's World Class Championship Wrestling review for the 2nd of January, 1982. Please feel free to like, subscribe, comment below if there's a series you'd like to see. I know I have many series going, but I've just decided to kind of hit refresh with the Kayfabe Era or Golden Era series and get through everything as I can when I can. Until next time, keep your feet on the ground, your mind in the moment. Until next time, everybody.